we'll manage to talk about this topic together in an interesting way. So as these two quotes illustrate, the knowledge society discourse has been around for quite some time now, and today it's still going strong. Scientific research is considered key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and universities are seen to contribute significantly to the development of countries through higher education and research. And higher education and research can in turn contribute to local and global problem solving, independent problem solving. So we do have a lot of knowledge in the world, but it's not distributed equally. The light is not shining as strongly everywhere. So this is the topic that I study in my research and also try to learn from in my other job, coordinating collaborations with African universities. So this map is meant to illustrate the unequal distribution of knowledge resources in the world. It is a bit old, and it's based on the number of scientific papers in natural sciences, engineering, and technology that have been published where the researchers live. And so you can see where the least amount of research is produced. And though things have changed, there's still quite a bit of inequality. And also, this is not the only way to measure scientific capacity, of course. There are other fields of research, there are other types of publications, as well as other kinds of university capacity indicators and outputs. And like I said, things are changing and things are getting better in that sense. The number of both public and private universities are growing. It's growing a lot. And the demand for higher education is increasing in a massive manner, also creating some quality assurance problems. But there are at least universities growing in order to meet this demand. And so more people are being able to get higher education. More money is being invested in research globally, even though economic growth not necessarily following the same curve. Countries are choosing to spend money on research to a higher degree. And in the face of this picture, that is a very good thing. Also, the number of scientists is increasing, and they are more mobile, so they're interacting more globally. Gender equality in science is also improving, slowly but surely. Publications worldwide have increased by 20% in the last 10 years. And the collaboration between the so-called North and the so-called South, and between the South and the South, are also increasing. And challenges related to climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals seem to be supporting this increased collaboration. So we are realizing that we have a lot of problems in common, and we're working more together to solve them. That's my conclusion from these trends. So the good news is that the so-called North-South divide in research is actually diminishing, but there's still significant inequalities, and depending on where you look in the world, and plenty to work on, in other words. And so there are many different actors working on improving the state of universities in the world. As you can probably imagine, these different actors are doing it for various different reasons and with different methods. But still, there's a large network, and this is not all of them, of course. And a few examples of them are on this slide. So what I will focus on today in this brief talk is aid to universities in low-income countries, sometimes called science aid or research aid. So the focus is on the Swedish research aid actor SAREC, or later SIDA-SAREC, which along with Canada's IDRC were pioneers in providing aid to universities in low-income countries and supporting development research. They both started doing this kind of work in the 70s and have been doing this since, and other donors have been adding to the group working on this area, but SIDA and SAREC remain, former SAREC remains pioneers. So I dedicated both my master's and my PhD to studying Swedish research aid, so it's fair to say I'm a bit of a nerd in this area, but today I won't wade through the empirical and theoretical complexities as much as I would like. I will just try to explain briefly what research aid is and what some of the success factors and risks are seen to be with this practice. Okay, so what can research aid consist of? Many different activities that can both have a capacity building effect, in other words, creating the preconditions for sustainable research infrastructure and capacity, and also development research with a focus on results that can be applied to development problems in those countries. So one important activity is to support research in low-income country universities, often in collaboration with the so-called donor country universities. Also, it could be in areas like mathematics, environmental science, health sciences, agriculture. Basically, the idea is that the prioritized areas are supposed to be set by the low-income country and the actors there. Also, there can be support to research conducted in international organizations that have more concentrated capacity on certain areas like health and agriculture, for example. And the idea is that they produce results that are universally valid in some sense, and this has received some critique because not all research that is universal is actually universal. You have to have this local adaptation. But still, there are lots of different results that come to use in many countries that are done in regional organizations, international organizations. University to university collaboration that focuses on building training programs for masters and PhD, so assisting in building up this capacity, strengthening this capacity to for training masters and PhD students. And this can be carried out in the low-income country, the high-income country, or both, preferably in both or in the low-income country. It's one example is the sandwich programs for PhD, where PhD students may have supervisors in their home country as well as in the donor country, for example. Also support to national research councils in order to strengthen the local systems for financing of research for sustainable for sustainability in the future. Infrastructure support. This is a sometimes forgotten part of research capacity. In order to have a functioning higher education and research system, you need ICT, administrative systems, and so on, laboratories, so on. So this can also be built into so-called bilateral cooperation. And then also support to research networks. So research is very network dependent as it is, but if research has scarce resources in certain areas, then you can learn from each other and pool resources and in that way strengthen certain subjects in regions. So, for example, in periods of repressive governments in Latin America, for example, in the 70s and 80s, social science, critical social sciences received support as a way to keep that democratic perspective alive in research aid support. Okay, and so what is the verdict on research aid? Is it good, or should we collaborate in some other way? And so many studies have concluded that it is a good form of aid. It's considered less politicized, and it's seen as a universal, like science is a universal language with similar goals and norms. So it's a good way to support development according to these studies. But the success depends on the level of relevance that is achieved through close connection to the priorities in low-income countries. And establishing the priorities that represent this low-income country can sometimes be very difficult. Whose interests come into this agenda setting and so on. And sometimes it has been donor-driven, sometimes it's been driven by the university, sometimes the government, and so on. So it can be difficult. And coordination amongst development agencies is considered essential in order to avoid so-called donor overload, because there may be many donors working to support universities in Tanzania, for example, or another country. And a lot of time can be spent by the university in question to try to see what kind of strategies the different donors have and so on, and making the priorities based on this. So avoiding donor overload is a success factor. And then also support to entire institutions rather than supporting separate subjects or certain departments is preferable, so that the whole universities can benefit. Support to both basic research and applied research is important. They are interdependent. Sometimes there's a popular trend, now it's all has to be applied research because quick results and so on. But basic sciences are required in order to have sustainable structures to be able to develop applied research in that context with time. So that's another success factor, to not forget both areas. And the biggest problem are the inequalities that, perhaps not surprisingly, since that's part of the problem that's trying to be solved. So it's ironic but not surprising. There needs to be a two-way street with mutual interest, learning and respect. So who sets the agenda when you're starting a collaboration between a university in a low-income country and a university in a high-income country? Who has control over defining the problems and finding the solutions? Who has the budget control, documentation and reporting? Also, unequal preconditions in terms of researchers' salaries. We have quite different preconditions between high-income countries and low-income countries. Access to funding, access to time, what is demanded of us as researchers in the different contexts allows us to engage in research or education or management in different ways. And access to time is an important factor that can create unequal relations and not allow time to spend on the research. Access to infrastructure, like I mentioned before, equipment, books, or other infrastructure. So I'm starting to wind down here. But in the past, Swedish research bills have encouraged research collaboration with low-income countries, but mainly financed by foreign aid, and not as clearly based on mutual interest as regular research funding, whereas the research on this area shows that mutual interest is important in order to create equal and sustainable relationships and collaborations. So it's positive that the developments today are supporting that direction. So this has been changing, and the recent research bill underscores global engagement, and more research funding calls are now including low-income countries more as potential collaborators. So the interest from Swedish universities seems to be increasing to collaborate with low-income countries and not just other high-income countries or middle-income countries. So I just want to end by encouraging you to think and learn about how knowledge resources are spread around the world or not. And we are all very different in what we're working on or doing in our lives, but perhaps many of us already do some things related to, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. Can we make new connections in order to contribute to a more inclusive knowledge society? Can we reach out to new collaborating partners, different actors than we used to collaborating with, being a little more innovative in our approach? So, thank you.